The First World War, also called the Great War, was one of the most devastating conflicts in modern history. It involved the vast majority of the world's nations and resulted in over 16 million deaths. So here's a quick breakdown of this important war. To start, the war began in 1914 and lasted until 1918. The main participants were divided into two competing alliances. On one side were the Allied powers, which included France, Russia, the British Empire, and later the United States. On the other side were the Central Powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Now the origins of the war are complex and have been heavily debated by historians. But basically it was a result of a number of underlying tensions in Europe. These included a series of pre-existing alliances between nations, a general atmosphere of militarism and aggressive nationalism, and growing imperial rivalries, particularly between Britain and Germany. The immediate trigger for the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Ferdinand's assassination set off a chain reaction of events that led to a series of declarations of war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Soon after, Germany supports Austria unconditionally and began making plans to aid them in the conflict. France and Russia had obligations to defend Serbia and thus began making preparations to get involved. As each country began mobilizing its forces, the prospect of a large-scale conflict became apparent. Within a month, the once fragmented conflict had escalated into a full-blown war that would soon engulf the entire continent and eventually the entire world. The war was fought primarily in Europe, but spread to other parts of the world as well. Fighting took place in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. For example, British forces fought against the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, while Japanese forces seized German colonies in the Pacific. On the Western Front, the fighting was characterized by a stalemate. The Germans' initial plan was to quickly defeat France and Belgium and then focus on Russia. This plan failed when the British and French forces stopped the German advance at the Battle of the Marne. After the battle, the front lines became largely static, with neither side able to make any significant gains. This led to a situation where the war became one of attrition, with both sides suffering massive casualties in order to gain only a few miles of enemy territory. The battles of the Somme, Verdun, and Ypres were particularly brutal and resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. New technologies were introduced during the war, including poison gas, tanks, airplanes, and submarines. These new weapons resulted in a level of destruction and casualties never seen before. Soldiers on the Western Front faced not only the threat of death from enemy fire, but also from the elements and disease. Conditions in the trenches were often horrific, with soldiers wading in knee-deep water, sleeping in the mud, and eating and drinking from vessels that had not been cleaned properly. In 1917, the entry of the United States into the war proved decisive. American troops provided much-needed reinforcements to the exhausted European armies. By this time, the Central Powers were near collapse. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed ending the war. The treaty that ended the war was the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, disarmament, and a ban on conscription. The treaty also established the League of Nations, an international organization created to prevent future wars. However, the treaty's harsh terms contributed to the rise of extremism in Germany and ultimately paved the way for the Second World War. So that's a very quick summary of the First World War. If you want to learn more about this topic or any other historical event, be sure to check out the additional resources. And thanks for watching.